November 8th, 1942. Somewhere off the coast of Morocco, the troop ship USS Thomas Stone bucked and heaved through Mediterranean swells that had been turning men's stomachs since we left Norfolk 3 weeks ago. I stood at the rail in the pre-dawn darkness, watching phosphorescence trail from the hull, trying to keep down the powdered eggs in coffee we'd choked down an hour before. Around me, the invasion fleet stretched to every horizon, hundreds of ships carrying an American army into its first major ground combat against Hitler's forces. Most of us had never heard a shot fired in anger. Within days, some of us would be dead. My name is Private First Class Michael Brennan, Rifleman, Company B, 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division. 20 years old, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, son of a steel worker who'd fought in the Meuse Argonne. I joined up 3 days after Pearl Harbor, driven by the same patriotic fury that swept millions of us into uniform. 9 months of training at Fort Benning had taught me how to strip an M1 Garand blindfolded, how to dig a foxhole, how to march 30 miles with a full pack. Nothing had prepared me for what was coming. The darkness was absolute, except for the dim glow of shielded running lights on nearby vessels. No smoking on deck, no lights visible from shore. The convoy maintained radio silence, communicating only by blinker signal. I could hear men vomiting over the side, the creak of davits holding the landing craft, the eternal throb of the ship's engines. The air tasted of salt and diesel fuel and fear. Sergeant Kowalski, our squad leader, moved along the rail checking equipment. He was 28, a regular army man from Chicago who'd been in since '39. He had hard eyes and scarred knuckles and a way of looking at you that made you check your rifle twice. He stopped beside me, studying the dark coastline barely visible as a deeper black against the night sky. "Nervous, Brennan?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Good. Means you're not stupid." He pulled out a cigarette, looked at it longingly, put it back. "The Krauts are waiting for us somewhere. Maybe not here, maybe not today, but somewhere soon. When it comes, don't think. Just do what we trained. Keep your head down, keep moving, and for God's sake, don't bunch up." The convoy had sailed from America carrying Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa. 3 task forces were hitting different points simultaneously: Casablanca on Morocco's Atlantic coast, Oran in Algeria, and Algiers further east. Our regiment was assigned to Oran, where intelligence promised light resistance from Vichy French forces, who might not even fight. We'd heard the French were tired of German occupation, ready to join the Allied cause. We'd heard a lot of things that would prove to be optimistic. At 05:30 hours, the naval bombardment began. The darkness erupted in orange flashes as the cruisers and destroyers opened up on shore batteries. The sound rolled across the water like continuous thunder, each impact visible as a brief flower of flame on the distant hills. Traces arced in both directions, lazy looking at distance, lethal up close. We stood along the rail watching our first battle, none of us understanding yet what we were seeing, that each flash represented someone's death or mutilation. Away landing craft. The David squealed, lowering the Higgins boats to the churning water. We formed up in the salt order, each man checking the equipment of the man in front. 70 pounds of gear, rifle, ammunition, grenades, entrenching tool, gas mask, rations, canteen, first aid kit. My hand shook as I fixed my bayonet. Around me, men made jokes that didn't land or prayed quietly, or stood silent with the 1,000-yard stare that would become familiar. The climb down the cargo net was treacherous in the darkness, waves surging against the hull, the landing craft rising and falling below. You had to time your drop, let go at the top of the swell, or risk falling 30 feet into the boat. Private Henderson from 3rd Squad mistimed it, broke his ankle on impact, was carried away cursing as we prepared to assault a hostile shore. He was lucky. The ankle kept him out of Kasserine.
36 men packed into the Higgins boat, shoulders touching, gear pressing into backs and ribs. The coxswain gunned the engine, and we surged away from the ship toward the dark coastline, now lit by the continuing bombardment. Cold spray soaked us immediately. Men vomited into the bilges, where seawater and fuel oil sloshed around our boots. The boat rose and fell with sickening regularity, the flat bottom slamming into each wave. Lieutenant Howell stood at the front, one hand on the ramp, the other on his pistol. He was 22, Princeton educated, commissioned 6 months ago. He looked as terrified as the rest of us, but kept his voice steady. "Lock and load, fix bayonets, remember your training." We fumbled with cold fingers to chamber rounds. The distinctive ping of Garand clips sliding home echoed in the confined space. Safety off, finger outside the trigger guard. The beach was 300 yards away now, close enough to see individual buildings in the port town. Flashes sparkled along the shoreline, machine gun fire, aimed at us. The rounds made a peculiar snapping sound passing overhead, like someone cracking a wet towel. The coxswain hunched lower. Water splashed up around us, each splash marking a near miss. 200 yards, 100. The engine roared as we approached maximum speed, bow rising. Then we hit. The impact threw everyone forward. The ramp dropped with a crash, and Lieutenant Howell charged into waist-deep water, shouting for us to follow. I went over the side into water so cold it stopped my breath. The weight of the gear tried to pull me under. I struggled forward, holding the Garand above my head, feet searching for purchase on the shifting sand. Machine gun fire raked the surf. Men fell, disappearing under the water or floating, face down. I couldn't tell who was hit, couldn't stop to help. Just keep moving, just reach the beach. The water grabbed at my legs like hands trying to pull me down. 50 yards of exposed surf before reaching the cover of a low seawall. I made it. Collapsed behind the wall, gasping, water streaming from my uniform. Around me, other men piled up, some wounded, all exhausted. The sergeants were already organizing us, pointing out targets, getting us firing. I peered over the wall, saw muzzle flashes from a concrete bunker 200 yards inland, squeezed off my first combat rounds, without aiming, without seeing a target, just shooting at the flashes like we'd been taught. The fighting for Oran lasted 2 days. The French resistance was stiffer than expected. Well-entrenched colonial troops who'd been told we were invaders, not liberators. We learned about house-to-house fighting, about clearing buildings, about the sound a bullet makes hitting concrete near your head versus hitting sandbags versus hitting flesh. We learned that training on a range is nothing like combat. We learned that some men freeze when it matters, and some men you never expected become heroes. We learned what burning vehicles smell like, and what phosphorus does to human bodies, and how quickly exhaustion can make you careless. We also learned we were amateurs facing professionals. The French Foreign Legionnaires defending Oran were veterans of colonial wars. They moved with economy and precision. They didn't waste ammunition. They didn't panic. When they counterattacked, it was coordinated and devastating. We held them with weight of numbers and naval gunfire, but it was ugly and expensive. Company B lost 18 men killed, 43 wounded. We'd been in combat for 36 hours, but we took Oran. The French commander surrendered on November 10th, and his troops, seeing the overwhelming Allied strength, agreed to join our cause. They greeted us with cigarettes and wine, these men who'd been shooting at us hours before, telling us through interpreters that they'd always been with the Allies at heart, that Vichy orders meant nothing. I drank the wine and shook their hands and tried to forget that they'd killed my friends. The campaign moved east. The plan was to race across Algeria and Tunisia, link up with British forces pushing west from Egypt, and trap Rommel's Africa Corps between us. Intelligence said German forces in Tunisia were weak, disorganized. Intelligence was wrong.
We moved in trucks and half-tracks through a landscape unlike anything I'd seen. Pennsylvania was green and wet and close. North Africa was endless, brown, empty space that hurt your eyes under a sun that felt like a physical weight. The coastal mountains gave way to high desert plateau, and then to passes that wound through rocky hills where an enemy could hide an army. November became December. We dug positions in frozen ground at night, sweltered in midday heat. The food was terrible. Canned rations that tasted like cardboard, water with chemical purification tablets that made you gag. We learned to sleep sitting up, to shit in front of other men without embarrassment, to go days without bathing. We learned the sound of different artillery pieces, how to tell incoming from outgoing, how to judge from the sound whether a shell would land near you. Christmas 1942 found us in the eastern dorsal mountains, a range of hills that formed the last barrier before the coastal plain of Tunisia. We'd been in combat for 6 weeks. The 1st Division had taken casualties but remained effective. We were veterans now, though still green compared to what was coming. The Germans had used our slow advance to reinforce. The 5th Panzer Army, under Colonel General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, had landed in Tunisia with veteran units from the Eastern Front. They brought Tiger tanks, Mark IV Panzers, 88mm guns that could kill a Sherman from 2 miles away. They brought experienced commanders who understood mobile warfare. Most importantly, they brought Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, retreating west from Montgomery's pursuit, but far from defeated. We heard stories about Rommel from British liaisons, how his Africa Corps had run circles around larger forces, how he led from the front, appeared at critical points, inspired his men to impossible efforts, how he was a gentleman warrior who treated prisoners well and ignored Hitler's orders to execute commandos. These stories should have terrified us. Instead, they made us eager to prove ourselves against him. We were young and stupid and thought we were invincible. January 1943 brought rain that turned the desert into a morass. Our supply lines, already stretched, became tenuous. Trucks bogged down in mud that seemed bottomless. The airfields turned to soup, grounding the plains that provided our edge. We sat in waterlogged positions, eating cold rations and cursing, while somewhere out there the Germans prepared their response to the American invasion. The intelligence reports filtering down through channels spoke of enemy buildups opposite the Kasserine Pass, a gap in the mountains where the main road east descended to the coastal plain. The Second Corps, newly formed and untested, held a defensive line along the passes. We were part of that line, stretched thin across impossible frontages, our flanks exposed, our reserves inadequate. I remember a briefing from Lieutenant Howell in early February. He'd lost weight. We all had. His face was drawn, older than his years. He studied a map with concentrations of enemy symbols marked in red.
Intelligence believes Rommel will attack within a week. His Africa Corps is battered, but still dangerous. Combined with von Arnim's forces, they outnumber us in tanks and have local superiority in most weapons. Our advantage is air power, but only when the weather clears. The terrain favors defense. We hold the passes, make them pay for every yard. What if they break through, sir? This from Sergeant Kowalski, always asking the hard questions. Then we fall back to secondary positions and counterattack. Doctrine says defensive positions properly held are nearly impossible to break. We have artillery support, tank destroyers in depth, mines covering approaches. Doctrine. We'd learn about doctrine versus reality soon enough. February 14th, 1943. Valentine's Day, someone joked. A shit date with the Africa Corps. The attack came at dawn with an artillery barrage that defied description. Thousands of shells screaming from the pre-dawn darkness, impacting along our positions in rolling curtains of high explosive. The ground shook continuously, dirt and rocks raining down, the noise so intense that you couldn't think, couldn't hear the man screaming next to you.
I huddled in my foxhole, hands over my helmet, mouth open to equalize pressure like we'd been taught, praying to God I'd forgotten I'd believed in. Each shell was a personal message from death. Each near miss felt like salvation. Each direct hit on a nearby position meant friends obliterated, ceased to exist, transformed from living men to scattered meat in an instant. The barrage lifted. In the ringing silence that followed, we heard the engines. Panzers, lots of them, emerging from the morning haze like prehistoric monsters, Mark III and Mark IV tanks with their long guns traversing, searching for targets. Behind them came the Panzer Grenadiers, mechanized infantry mounted in half-tracks, experienced troops who'd fought from Poland to Stalingrad. "Tank destroyer! Get the tank destroyer up!" The M10s were supposed to be our answer to German armor. 3-inch guns that could penetrate anything except the new Tigers. But the crews were green, had never engaged moving targets under fire. The first destroyer took a direct hit before firing a shot, the crew escaping as flames engulfed their vehicle. The second managed 2 rounds, both misses, before an 88mm shell penetrated the thin armor and detonated the ammunition. The explosion was enormous, the turret flying 30 feet in the air. Our Shermans counterattacked, but were outgunned and outmaneuvered. German tanks used the terrain, appearing from behind ridges to fire and withdraw before our guns could respond. Their armor was thicker, their optics better, their crews veterans of 100 engagements. Our tankers were brave but inexperienced. We watched them burn in knocked-out Shermans, watched survivors bail out under machine gun fire, watched the panzers roll over our positions. The infantry assault came behind the armor breakthrough. German soldiers moved in small groups, using fire and movement, suppressing our positions while assault teams advanced. They threw grenades with precision, used machine guns to fix us in place while mortars found our foxholes. It was choreographed violence, each element supporting the others, overwhelming our static defense through superior tactics. We fell back. Not a fighting withdrawal, not a planned movement to secondary positions. A rout. Men dropped weapons and ran, abandoned positions without orders, streamed rearward in panic. Officers tried to rally them, form lines, re-establish defense. Some men listened. Most just kept running. I stayed with what remained of Second Squad.
Sergeant Kowalski had us moving by teams, one group covering while the other displaced. It was textbook, exactly what we'd trained. But we were 6 men trying to delay a division. We'd fire a few rounds, see panzers swinging toward us, run to the next position. Each stand lasted minutes before being overrun. By noon, we'd fallen back 3 miles. The Kasserine Pass, the key terrain we'd been ordered to hold at all costs, was firmly in German hands. Rommel had achieved a breakthrough, and nothing stood between his panzers and our supply depots at Tebessa. The next 4 days were a nightmare of retreat and confusion. We moved at night, hid during the day, scrounged food from abandoned vehicles, drank water from shell craters that tasted of chemicals and death. Command and control had broken down. We were just fragments of units trying to survive, hoping to find friendly forces, terrified of running into German patrols. We met them on February 18th, near the village of Tala. 26 men from various units, armed with whatever weapons we'd kept, exhausted and hungry and defeated. The German patrol consisted of a Marder 3 tank destroyer and an infantry section mounted in half-track. They appeared suddenly around a curve on the road, close enough to see the dust on their uniforms. The Marder's guns swung toward us. There was nowhere to run, no cover nearby. We were dead. I thought of Pittsburgh, of my mother, of all the things I'd never do. Time slowed. I saw the muzzle flash before I heard the shot. The shell passed 3 feet over my head, impacting the hillside behind us. Why had he missed? Then I saw the gun couldn't depress enough to hit us at this closer range. The German commander realized it too. He was already traversing to back up, create distance for his gun to bear. Sergeant Kowalski screamed, "Charge them! It's the only chance!" We ran forward, 26 men against armored vehicles, firing from the hip, screaming like madmen. The infantry in the half-track returned fire, their MG-42 machine gun ripping the air, but we were too close, the angle wrong. Men fell, but the rest kept coming.
I reached the half-track as a German soldier stood to throw a grenade. I shot him from 10 feet away, the first time I'd knowingly killed a man. He looked surprised, dropped the grenade into the vehicle, tried to warn his comrades. The explosion killed 3 of them instantly. The fighting lasted 90 seconds, the most intense violence I've ever experienced. We killed the German crews with rifles, grenades, bayonets, and bare hands. When it ended, all 22 Germans were dead. We'd lost 9 men. The survivors stood gasping, covered in blood, not all our own, staring at what we'd done. Sergeant Kowalski, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, surveyed the carnage. "Strip them for weapons and ammunition. Take their food and water. We're moving in 5 minutes." Someone vomited. Someone else sat down and wouldn't get up until Kowalski kicked him. I searched a dead German's pockets, found photographs of a woman and 2 children, a letter written in script I couldn't read. He looked about 30, had kind eyes and death. I'd killed him. I put the photographs back in his pocket. We reached Allied lines on February 19th, or what passed for lines. The entire front was fluid. Units intermingled, no one sure where the enemy was. British reinforcements from 1st Army were arriving, heavy artillery and tanks that outgunned anything the Germans had. Rommel's advance had stalled, partly from Allied resistance, but mostly from supply problems. His logistics were as stretched as ours had been.
The counterattack began February 22nd. British and American forces working together, properly coordinated this time, with adequate artillery support and air cover when the weather cleared. We pushed back into the passes, retracing ground we'd fled days before. This time the fighting was different. We moved more cautiously, used combined arms properly, didn't underestimate the enemy. We retook Kasserine Pass on February 25th. The German forces, low on fuel and ammunition, withdrew in good order. We found the ground littered with destroyed vehicles, American and German mixed together, abandoned equipment, mass graves marked with crude crosses. The smell of death was everywhere, bodies bloating in the sun, a sweet, sick odor that clung to your clothes and filled your mouth. Company B, 2nd Battalion, 16th Infantry, entered the Kasserine battle with 140 men. We came out with 73 effectives. The rest were dead, wounded, missing, or broken by combat stress. Some of the missing would turn up later, stragglers who'd gotten lost in the retreat. Others were in German POW camps or lying in shallow graves we'd never find. The American defeat at Kasserine became a turning point, not because we lost, but because of what we learned. We were arrogant, believed our equipment and industrial might made us invincible. The Germans taught us humility. They showed us what professional soldiers looked like, what combined arms warfare meant, and how important training and leadership were. Changes came quickly. General Eisenhower relieved ineffective commanders, promoted aggressive leaders. General George Patton took command of 2nd Corps, bringing discipline and aggressive spirit. Training intensified. Tactics were revised to emphasize mobile defense and combined arms. We studied German methods, learned to respect our enemy while understanding their weaknesses. The campaign continued into spring. We pushed east, fighting for every hill and valley. The Germans fell back, but they made us pay for every mile. El Gatar, Hill 609, Bizerte. Each battle taught lessons written in blood. We got better, harder, more professional. By May 1943, the Africa Corps was trapped in Tunisia, its back to the sea, surrounded by overwhelming Allied forces. They fought with desperate courage, but the mathematics of war were inexorable. On May 13th, the remaining German and Italian forces in North Africa surrendered. Over 250,000 prisoners, equipment enough for 10 divisions. The entire Africa Corps destroyed. I survived North Africa, went on to Sicily, then Italy, made sergeant after Salerno, earned Bronze Star at Anzio, though I can't remember what for. The fighting blurs together after a while, one battle indistinguishable from another. But I never forgot Kasserine, never forgot the taste of defeat, the terror of running from panzers, the shame of abandoning positions. We weren't special at Kasserine, weren't heroes. We were ordinary men, inadequately trained, poorly led, thrown against veterans who knew their business. We failed because we were unprepared, because we believed our own propaganda, because war is harder than anyone who hasn't experienced it can imagine.
But we learned. That's the thing about Americans. We're slow learners, but persistent. We made mistakes, acknowledged them, fixed them. The army that stumbled at Kasserine was unrecognizable from the force that crossed the Rhine 2 years later. We became what we needed to be, paid the tuition in blood, and finished the course. Sergeant Kowalski didn't survive the war. Killed by a sniper in Normandy, June 1944. He died instantly, they said, though I've never believed anyone knows that for certain.
He was the best soldier I knew, the man who kept me alive when I should have died a dozen times. His death proved that competence and experience weren't always enough, that random chance killed the talented and skilled as readily as the foolish. Of the 17 men in my original squad that landed at Oran, 3 survived the war unwounded. 3. The rest were killed, crippled, or disappeared into the great machine of war that ground up men and spit out statistics. Each one had a name, a story, people who loved them. Each one died far from home, in places they'd never heard of before the war, for reasons that seemed clear at the time but grow murky with distance. I think about them often now. 78 years old, sitting in Pittsburgh, surrounded by grandchildren who can't imagine what their grandfather experienced. They ask about the war sometimes, expect stories of heroism and glory. I tell them about the cold, the fear, and the confusion, about watching friends die, about the weight of a rifle after marching 20 miles, about the taste of bad coffee and worse rations, about the constant presence of death, not dramatic or heroic, just sudden and arbitrary and final. They lose interest quickly. The truth about war isn't dramatic enough for people raised on movies and video games. The reality is boredom punctuated by terror, exhaustion so complete you'll sleep standing up, and the gnawing knowledge that your survival is more luck than skill. Heroes exist, but they're rare. Mostly it's just ordinary men trying not to die while doing a job that required killing other ordinary men. Kasserine taught me that war isn't glorious, it's waste. Waste of young lives, waste of potential, waste of everything that makes humans valuable. We won because we learned to be better at waste than our enemies, because we could afford losses they couldn't, because our industrial base could replace equipment and train replacements faster than they could kill us. The mathematics of attrition aren't heroic, but they're effective. By 1945, we'd learned to wage industrial warfare with ruthless efficiency. We didn't outfight the Germans soldier for soldier. We buried them under material superiority, replaced our losses faster than they could inflict them, and ground them down through sheer weight of resources. That's the lesson of Kasserine Pass. Not that Americans were poor soldiers initially, though we were. Not that Germans were supermen, though they fought with skill and courage. The lesson is that war is decided by logistics, training, production, and the willingness to pay the butcher's bill until the enemy can no longer match it. We paid that bill. At Kasserine, we paid in panic and humiliation. Later, at places like Hürtgen Forest and the Bulge, we paid in thousands of lives. But we kept paying, kept learning, kept coming, until there was nothing left of Hitler's war machine but rubble and corpses, and a peace bought with blood measured in oceans. I received a letter in 1952 from a German veteran who'd fought at Kasserine. He'd found my name in a unit history, wanted to make contact with a fellow survivor. We corresponded for years, 2 old men who'd tried to kill each other as young men, finding common ground in shared trauma. He wrote about the North African campaign from his perspective, how they'd respected American industrial might but despised our tactical ability, how Kasserine had seemed proof that the Americans were soft, rich boys playing at war, how their confidence had turned to despair as American competence improved while German resources dwindled. His final letter came in 1967. He was dying of cancer, wanted to say goodbye to the few correspondents he maintained. He wrote about regret, not for fighting, but for the waste of it all. 2 nations of civilized people slaughtering each other over ideologies and territorial ambitions. Millions dead,
cities destroyed. For what? So borders could shift and old men could claim victory?
I never answered that last letter. What could I say? That I agreed, but still believed we'd been right to fight. That defeating Hitler justified the cost. That the boys who died at Kasserine hadn't died for nothing. I believed all that then. I still do, mostly. But the certainty has eroded with years, worn down by memories of faces I'll never forget, and names I'm forgetting. The last survivor of Company B besides myself died in 2008. The reunion group had dwindled to 3, then 2, then just me. Now I'm the only one left who remembers what it felt like to flee from panzers at Kasserine, to taste defeat and shame and fear. When I die, those memories die with me. The history books will remain, cold facts and battle maps and casualty figures. But the human truth, the texture of experience, the weight of it, will be gone. Maybe that's appropriate. Maybe each generation needs to learn these lessons fresh, written in their own blood. Maybe the horror of war can't be taught, only experienced. I hope not. I hope my grandchildren never have to learn what I learned, never have to make the impossible choices war demands, never have to live with memories that won't fade, even after 78 years. But I fear they will. History suggests humans are incapable of learning from others' suffering, only their own. The cycle continues. Young men march to war believing it will be different for them, that they're special, that their cause justifies any cost. Most learn otherwise. The survivors carry that knowledge to their graves, while a new generation grows up innocent of war's reality, ready to repeat the cycle. Kasserine Pass was just one battle in one campaign in a war that killed 60 million people. In the vast scope of World War II, it barely registers. But for those of us who were there, who fled in panic or stood in desperation, who watched friends die and wondered why we survived, it remains the defining moment of our lives. I was 20 years old at Kasserine, immortal and terrified in equal measure. I'm 98 now, approaching the end, no longer afraid of death because I've been intimate with it for 80 decades. But I still remember the sound of panzers, the smell of burning vehicles, the weight of my rifle, the faces of men I couldn't save. Those memories don't fade. They don't soften with time. They remain sharp and immediate, more real than yesterday, clearer than this morning. In quiet moments, I'm 20 again, crouched in a foxhole while the earth explodes around me, certain I'm about to die, unable to believe I'll survive the next 5 minutes. I did survive. 78 years later, I'm still here, still carrying Kasserine inside me. Every soldier carries his wars forever. We never really come home. Part of us remains in those foreign fields, among the dead we left behind, paying a price that compounds with interest until the final reckoning. That's the truth they don't tell you when you enlist, that war doesn't end when the shooting stops, that survival isn't the same as victory, that the cost of war is not measured only in casualties and treasure, but in pieces of yourself you can never recover, in innocence lost and humanity compromised. We defeated the Germans, destroyed their armies, occupied their country, reshaped their nation. We won. But victory didn't feel like I'd imagined as a young man boarding that troopship in Norfolk. It felt like exhaustion, relief, and loss in roughly equal measures. The men we'd killed stayed dead. The friends we'd lost didn't return. The years we'd spent at war couldn't be reclaimed. Kasserine Pass taught me that war is necessary sometimes, that some causes justify fighting, that evil exists and must be opposed. But it also taught me that war is always tragedy, always waste, always a failure of humanity to solve problems through anything but violence. Both truths coexist. Both are real. Living with that contradiction, honoring the necessity while mourning the cost, is the burden of those who survive war. We carry it quietly, speak of it rarely, pass it eventually to the silence of death, where all soldiers' stories finally end.
I'm tired now. Tired in ways sleep can't cure. But I remain, last witness to a moment in history that shaped everything that followed. When I'm gone, Kasserine will become purely academic, just another entry in the vast catalogue of World War II battles. The human dimension, the lived experience, will exist only in letters and memoirs and old photographs of young men who never imagined growing old. Perhaps that's enough. Perhaps every generation must discover these truths anew, must learn that war is both necessary and terrible, that courage and fear are inseparable, that survival is as much fortune as virtue. Perhaps the stories we tell, inadequate as they are, plant seeds that might someday flower into wisdom. Or perhaps I'm just an old man trying to make meaning from experiences that resist meaning, trying to justify a lifetime carrying weight no words can adequately convey. Either way, this is what remains. Memories sharp as broken glass, names and faces that won't fade, and the knowledge that I was there when America learned to fight at a place called Kasserine Pass in a desert far from home. The panzers have been silent for 78 years, but in my mind, they're still advancing. Steel monsters emerging from dust and heat haze, and I'm still 20 years old, terrified and determined, running and fighting, and somehow surviving another day in a war that never really ends. That's Kasserine. That's war. That's the price we paid and keep paying long after the victory parades fade and the monuments weather and the historians move on to other topics. We paid it then. We pay it now. We'll pay it until the last of us is gone, and then the debt will be erased, because no one remains to remember what was owed. Sleep well, brothers. You've been at rest for 78 years. I'll join you soon enough, and then Kasserine will belong only to history. Until that day comes, I'll remember for all of us, carry the weight we shared, and testify to what we learned in that desert about courage and fear and the terrible price of victory. The convoy assembled off Morocco in November 1942. By February 1943, we'd learned what we didn't know we needed to learn. By May, we'd paid the tuition and earned our degree. By 1945, we'd become what we needed to be. But the cost, God, the cost, it still echoes in the silence of every passing year. in every Memorial Day when I stand before monuments bearing names I recognize, in every night when sleep brings me back to foxholes and burning vehicles and the sound of panzers in the dawn. This is what Kasserine Pass means to me, to us, to the 78 men from Company B who didn't come home. This is the story that needs telling before the last voice falls silent. This is the testimony of those who learned war's lessons the only way they can truly be learned, by surviving them, barely, and carrying them forward into a peace that never feels quite real. We were there. We fought. We failed and learned and persevered. And now, at the end, I remain to say, remember us not as heroes, but as ordinary men who faced extraordinary circumstances, who did our best with what we had, who paid a price that can never be fully calculated or understood by those who weren't there. Remember Kasserine Pass. Remember what it cost. Remember that victory in war is never free, never clean, never as glorious as the songs suggest. Remember that every casualty figure represents a universe of loss, a constellation of grief, a story that deserves telling, but will eventually be forgotten. I am the last who remembers. Soon I'll be gone, and Kasserine will be history, not memory. That's as it should be. Time moves forward. New stories replace old. Life continues for those who survive. But for now, for this moment, I remember. For all of us. For the boys who died in the desert. For the men who came home changed. For the families who waited and grieved. For everyone who paid the price of war, whether they wore uniforms or not. I remember Kasserine Pass, and I always will, until memory itself fades into the darkness that awaits us all. The final peace that even the worst wars cannot disturb.